Welcome to the Checkpoint course on threat prevention. So far, so good. We've configured IPS, antibot, antivirus, content awareness, data loss prevention, URL filtering, application control, and then we've done series of tests. So now we are going to configure threat emulation and threat extraction. So these two blades are used in protecting the organization from threats. Okay, let's take a look at threat extraction. So when a particular user is trying to download a particular file from the internet, threat extraction blade, that is the threat extraction software or component, would inspect that document briefly within 10 seconds. And then it is going to extract all the active elements. By active elements, we mean hyperlinks, JavaScript, macros. It would sanitize the document and reconstruct it. So if a user is trying to download maybe a Word file, the document might be reconstructed to a PDF file. If that document contains hyperlinks, it will be removed. If it contains JavaScript, it will be removed. If it contains macros, it will be removed. So what the user is going to download will be a plain, stripped down, sanitized, safe version of that document, irrespective of the document. Whether it's clean or malicious, Checkpoint assumes that that document is malicious. Why? Because of threat extraction. Now, this is very fast and it happens within 10 seconds. But then, if you want real-time inspection, you want, like, you don't want Checkpoint to assume that everything is malicious and then to start removing macros, JavaScript, hyperlinks, and the rest of them, then you can go for threat emulation. So this threat emulation comes with a sandbox environment. So if a particular user is trying to download a file, Checkpoint is going to inspect that file in a sandbox environment. This takes about 3 minutes or so, depending on the size of the document, but about 3 minutes. This can be slow, yes, because users might have to wait at times for up to 3 minutes, but the good news about it is the fact that every single file or every single document based on your configurations will be inspected in a sandbox environment. It will do OS level inspection, CPU level inspection. It will try to watch out for behavioral patterns. It will perform behavioral analysis. It will check whether that document contains malwares, whether it contains suspicious files. Okay, this is useful in preventing polymorphic attacks, in preventing very advanced polymorphic attacks, in preventing zero-day attacks, unknown threats, and many more. So if you want that feature, you can enable threat emulation. Now, when the emulation is completed, if the document is malicious, Checkpoint will delete the entire document. But if the document is clean, Checkpoint will allow users to download the original version of the document. So that's a threat emulation for you. Remember that threat extraction would automatically assume that all documents are malicious and it will remove JavaScript, hyperlinks, macros, and everything, and then give users a reconstructed version of the document. But for threat emulation, if the document is inspected and is found out to be truly clean, users can download the original version of the document. And if that document is malicious, Checkpoint deletes it. So we're going to configure the two options. Okay, so let's start with threat extraction. We've checked threat extraction, it's fine. Now for threat emulation, you can emulate on the cloud. You can emulate locally on your firewall. The emulation is like inspecting documents in a sandbox environment. Now, If you want to emulate on Threat Cloud, you need to have a subscription with checkpoints. This is different from the licensing. But if you want to emulate locally on your firewall, it's fine. But one thing you should note is that if you choose to emulate locally on your firewall, this can impact the performance of your security gateway. The good news is files are going to be within the organization, fine, but it might impact the performance of your firewall. So if you have like a 3200 model that contains maybe 8 gig of RAM, or 3600 model that has about 8 gig RAM, and your emulation environment is consuming, you have threat emulation, you have IPS, you have anti-bot, antivirus, data loss prevention, and many more features, and then you still enable this local emulation, it might affect the performance. But then if you're using firewalls like 3800 that has 16 gig RAM, 1200, 12,000, the 12,000 series that allows you to even to add extra RAM and many more. If you have very high RAM and high CPU, it's fine. Or you can choose to have your own emulation appliance. So this can be local, like it can be a dedicated emulation appliance, a third party, where if users are trying to download documents, Checkpoint will send that document to your emulation appliance, and then after emulation is completed, Checkpoint uses the results to determine whether to allow users download that file or whether it's going to delete the file. Okay, but for the purpose of this lab, I'll just check Threats Cloud Emulation Service. Then I'll click on Next. It might give us an error because we don't have the subscription. Like this is a production environment, so we don't have Threat Cloud quota subscription. But yeah, this is a lab environment, but in a production environment, you should have that subscription. If you have that, you're not going to get this error. So for now, I'll just click on ignore errors and continue. Okay, so I want to clean potentially malicious paths from files with using threat extraction also. That is, I want threat emulation and threat extraction to work together. So I'll check this box. Then I'm going to click on next, and then I'll click on finish. But this is not all. I can still come to threat extraction to take a look at what I've done. So we can check, okay, if you want to enable API, you could enable web API. API stands for application programmable interface. If you want that, it's fine. If you want to delete original files, you can delete the original version of files. Okay, there are many things that you can do. You can log. Okay, now talking about threat emulation. So for threat emulation, you can choose to prevent or to detect. You can choose to use Checkpoint Threat Cloud, or you can choose to emulate locally. If you're going to be emulating locally, you can emulate. It's possible to use Windows 7, Windows 10, and many more for the emulation. And if you have a remote emulation appliance, you can check this box, and then you put the IP address of your remote emulation appliance. Okay, but for now, we'll leave this as Checkpoint Threat Cloud. There are many more things that we can take a look at, even the advanced feature. Now, okay, assuming we were emulating locally, we can choose the emulation environment, whether we want it to be Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Windows 10, and many more. But then we want to use Checkpoint Threat Cloud. You can also configure the the memory allocation. If you're going to be emulating locally, you can say, okay, fine. If we're emulating locally, emulation should not consume more than 70% of our total memory. Okay, so if you have 10 gig RAM, emulation should never use more than 7 gig of RAM. Okay, but we don't need all this because we are emulating on Checkpoint's Threat Cloud. Okay, so having done this, the very next thing that we're going to do would be to configure our threat prevention policy. So all we need to do is click on security policies, and then we'll come to threat prevention. Now, one thing about threat prevention, or one thing about policies, you need to configure the profile first. So we're going to configure profile first. Then we're going to call up that profile in the policy. So we'll click on profiles. In the previous sessions, we cloned this very strict profile. So this is it. We've configured features for antivirus. Okay, so I'll just click on it. We've configured for antibots. We've configured for antivirus. We've done all these settings. You can go back to watch the videos. We've configured all of this where we decided to process all file types. We decided to enable deep inspection scanning. We decided to enable scanning of archive files and many more. Even IPS, we've done some configurations as well. So now we're going to be configuring threat emulation and threat extraction. And in the next module, we'll configure protections for emails. But so far so good. Okay, fine. Okay, emails are going to be emulated for malicious contents. We're going to scan emails for viruses. We're going to, so we've checked this box. We're going to extract potential malicious attachments. Now, all these things, they require threats. If you check, emulate emails requires threat emulation. Extract potentially malicious attachments requires threat extraction. And then if you want to scan emails for viruses, it requires antivirus. So we've enabled all those blades. Okay, if you want to add a prefix to the email subject, maybe as an example, you want to give users warning that, okay, attachment was found malicious. It is recommended not to open this email. You can do that. It's fine. If you want to add maybe an X header, it's also fine. If you want to add customized text, as an example, you want to tell users that, okay, this document, anything that you want to add that you want your users to see. Okay, for example, the following verdicts were determined by checkpoints. This is malicious, this is not malicious, and everything. You can check all those options. If you want to, create some exceptions, you can do that. But so far so good. We're scanning all emails. Okay, let's come to the business of the day, which is threat emulation. So we'll click on threat emulation. For the user check messages, okay, when users are trying to download messages that are, you know, like they're trying to download files that are malicious, when the emulation is completed, they're going to get a user check message telling them that, oh, this has been blocked because malware was found. And then we can choose to inspect files coming from external and, DMZ interfaces. Then we want to emulate web, FTP, SMB as well. And then we're going to, instead of selecting 8 file types out of 84, we're going to check everything, okay? We want to emulate every single thing because we just want to emulate every single file. This might affect performance, but then I'm a proponent of security over performance, so long as there's a balance though. Yes, availability is important, but security is important, so we need to strike a balance. Okay, so we'll just check everything there. If you want maximum performance, you can go for appliances that have very high CPU and RAM, or you can use custom appliances as well. Okay, so what we are processing all file types. Now for archives, okay, if a file contains, okay, so let's see. So if an archive file contains, let's say if there's okay, if an archive file maybe contains exe in it, or we want that archive file to be prohibited. Okay, so if you're sending an archive file that has any exe in it or DLL, that file is going to be prohibited. If it contains, like a batch file, we want it to be prohibited. You could select as many file types as possible depending on what you want, but this is just my selection. In your production environment, depending on your company's policy, you can choose to prohibit certain file types as the case may be. Okay, so having done this, the very next thing that we're going to do will be to configure the emulation environment. Assuming we were emulating locally, we can check the emulation environment. Okay, we can say, okay, fine, we want to use, as an example, we want to emulate on maybe Windows 10, 64 bits, we want to emulate here. Or we can choose to use a remote appliance where we need to just input the name of the appliance and the IP address as well. We need to create an object for that. Or we can choose checkpoints, you know, we can choose emulate on Threat Cloud, and then we'll choose use checkpoints recommended emulation environment. Then we'll click on advanced. Now this talks about the emulation connection handling mode. Do you want a rapid delivery that is very, very fast emulation? Okay, so that files can be emulated within seconds, and then at times the files may be delivered to users before verdict is reached. Or do you want maximum prevention, meaning that if a user is trying to download documents, the user might have to wait for up to 3 minutes so that that document is fully inspected. If you work in a bank or very sensitive companies or environments, you would want to go for maximum prevention. So users must wait for emulation to be completed before they can download any file. And then we want to log every file that has been scanned. Now, having done this, the very next thing that we're going to do will be to configure threat extraction. Now, for threat extraction, you can choose to allow users to access the original file, or you can choose to allow them access only the sanitized version of that document. So I'll just uncheck this. Okay, so I don't want users to access the original file. I want them to access just, the reconstructed version. Or if you want, you can check this and then you can, okay, allow access to original files that are not malicious. Now, what this means is, okay, fine. If a user is trying to download a particular file, that file is going to be reconstructed. Macros, hyperlinks, and JavaScript will be removed from the file, from the document. So users, because threat extraction takes about 10 seconds, users can start working. They can start going about their normal activities. They can download the file, the, the reconstructed version, that is the safer version. They can download it and be working with it while threat emulation is still ongoing. Then if threat emulation is completed and the file is judged to be clean, that is the file does not contain malware, then users can download the original version of the file. Remember, it's a clean file. But if that file is malicious, then users cannot download or access the original file. So we'll check both options. For the protocols, we want to, you know, scan web and emails too. Now, you have two options. You can choose to convert documents to PDF, or you can choose to extract potentially malicious parts from files. Okay, so you can remove things like database queries, embedded images, embedded objects, macros, sensitive hyperlinks, JavaScript, and many more. If you want, you can add more things here. So let's take a look at it again. All these things are going to be extracted. They are going to be removed from the documents. So users will get a reconstructed, sanitized version, which is going to be temporary until emulation is completed. Now we want to process all file types, and then for the file types we can select every single file type. Okay, so every single file type should, because there's something. Okay, so every single file type should be should be, inspected. There's something called steganography. Okay, steganography refers to attackers hiding malware inside things like images and many more. So we're going to check, we want to process all the file types, whether it is bitmap image, Photoshop document, and everything. Okay, irrespective of the type of, okay, so all these, all these parts are going to be extracted. All these things will be extracted from it. Having done this, then we'll click on advanced. Okay, you can choose to log only files that threads were extracted from, or you can choose to log every single file. So you can see that, okay, this particular user downloaded this type of file. Whether it's malicious or not, we want to get logs for that. Yes, logging every file might consume space, but then if you have, let's say your firewall or your SMS has about 1 terabyte of, space, it's enough. Or if you have a SIM, or if you have maybe like a log server, it's fine as well. So you can log every single file. Now, talking about the exceptions, for corrupted files, we don't even want them to gain access. So corrupted files are going to be blocked. Okay. In fact, always deny access to the original corrupted file. So if a file is corrupted, users would never gain access to it. Now, for encrypted files, we can choose to allow encrypted files or deny encrypted files. Okay, we'll just leave allow. Okay, it's fine. Or you can choose to block and then always deny access to the original encrypted file. Okay, so you can always do this. It all depends on your company's policy. And then we've enabled indicator of compromise. We want indicator scanning as well. And then of course the malware DNS trap. If you have this, you can put the IP address here. Okay, so any infected host that is trying to access this particular IP address that is going to be imputed here will be identified as malicious. If you have that, like an honeypot, you can, put that there. And when you're done, the very next thing that we're going to do would be to save our work. Okay, so we need to save this. So having configured the profile, the next thing that we're going to do will be to call it up in the policy. So we are using the okay, we can call this our test threat prevention policy. Okay, and why? Okay, so we're going to call up this strict profile, and then the next thing that we're going to do will be to install policy. So after installing policy, we're going to run a test to check what we've done. So we'll just wait for policy installation to get completed. Now that policy installation has been completed, let's run a test on CP Check Me. So I think we'll search for CP Check Me. Okay. We'll just wait for this to come up. So now that policy installation has been completed, we are going to run a test. So far, we've enabled application control, URL filtering, data loss prevention. We've configured content awareness, IPS, threat emulation, anti-bot, antivirus, threat extraction. So we're going to come to this website, CP Check Me. We'll check the box. We'll click on check security now. So we're going to wait for this. This might present us with a captcha. If it does, we'll, check the boxes and then run the test. Okay, so let's see. It has started running. Wow, okay, so it gave us a green mark for malware infection, for command and control communication, so we're good to go. This looks beautiful. Let's check. Wow, for 0 day, this is fine. For browser exploits, we're protected. For anonymizer usage, we're protected. Oh, it gave us a red for data leakage. So let's check what is wrong. Okay, we'll just wait for this to get completed and then we can check what we've done so far. But this is checkpoint threat prevention. Our configurations, our policies are accurate. That's why we are protected against malware infection, downloading of infected files through HTTP, HTTPS, and IoT botnet exposure. We are protected from these attacks. We're also protected from, communication to command and control servers. We are protected against 0 day attacks, downloading infected archive files, downloading infected PDF. We're also protected against, browser exploits, accessing injected websites. For anonymizer usage, we're protected. But for data leakage, okay, so our firewall can stop data leakage exfiltration through HTTP, but unfortunately, it's not checking HTTPS. So in the next module, we'll take another look at this data leakage exfiltration through HTTPS. We'll check our policies and then we're going to run this test again. So with this, we've come to the end of this particular module. I'll meet you in the next one. Thank you.